Yeah.
Yeah, shall we start actually?
Well, I am ready whenever you are. So, yes.
Yeah. Amal sir.
Yes, sir. I'm here. We can start, I guess.
All right, we can start. Yes.
So, am I audible, Dan?
Yes, you are.
Yes, Nina.
Good evening to all. Let's begin this lecture with a few seconds of silence. Thank you. I welcome you all to the 31st C.E. Sheppard Memorial Lecture by Toril Moi, put forward by the Department of English of St. Berkman's College. Well, Professor C.A. Sheppard was a lecturer at SB College, and he was also the head of the Department of English. He was an inspiring teacher and who helped others to become a good teacher. Professor Sheppard was a noble and dignified human being whose memory is ever fresh in the hearts of his students till date. My name is Nina Abraham, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Dan George. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Nina. I hope I'm audible. Well, here are just a few guidelines that the participants are kindly requested to keep in mind to ensure the smooth conduct of today's program. All the questions that are intended for the question and answer sessions are to be posted in the comment sections in YouTube. A feedback form will be posted at the end of the webinar in the chat box in both Zoom and YouTube. E-certificates will be issued for participants who are present throughout the session and will be delivered only after the submission of the feedback form. Since all personal details are to be entered in the feedback form, participants are humbly requested not to introduce yourself in the comment section, as this might distract the speaker. Well, these are just a few points to keep in mind. Over to you, Nina.
Thank you, Dan. It's now time for the welcome address by the principal of St. Berkman's College, Dr. Jacob Matthews. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Nina. Dear Dr. Toril Moi, Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiyat, our manager, St. Berkman's College, other dignitaries, vice principals, Professor P.J. Thomas, head of the department, former teachers, invited guests, dear teachers and students. Good evening from India. I feel delighted to welcome everyone to 31st C.A. Sheppard Memorial Lecture, organized by the Department of English, St. Berkman's College, Changanacherry. It is indeed a happy moment for the Department of English and the college. I would like to introduce St. Berkman's College, Changanacherry, briefly for those who are virtually connected far and wide. Established in 1922, St. Berkman's College is an aided autonomous college affiliated to Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, Kerala. Over the past 9 decades, it has grown up gradually and steadily, initiating undergraduate programs in 1927, postgraduate programs in 1957, and research programs in 1986. It is ranked as the 79th best college in India by NIRF 2020, Ministry of Human Resources Development, Government of India. Founded by Venerable Mar Thomas Kuriyalasheri, Bishop of the Diocese of Changanacherry, St. Berkman's College began with the noble objective of the Universal Catholic Church to mold young men and women to strive for excellence in every field of life and human service. This institution has been always strives to do better. I am proud to say that all the academic activities on this campus are aimed at excellence. This academic activity of English department helps us to fondly recall the memory of a doyen of this college, Professor C.A. Sheppard. Colin Anthony Stuart Sheppard joined St. Berkman's College as a lecturer in English in 1943 and became head of the department in 1949. He was an inspiring lecturer and teacher and helped others shape themselves as good teachers. He was a delightful speaker, a writer, and a director. Lectures in Grammar and Idiom, Towards Better English and A Sense of English are some of his important works. He directed Shakespeare's play and helped many to become good actors. An erudite and inspiring teacher, Professor Sheppard was a noble and dignified human being as well, whose memory is ever fresh in the hearts of students and colleagues. Professor Toril Moi will deliver the 31st C.A. Sheppard Memorial Lecture on Wittgenstein and Literary Criticism, a new direction in literary studies. It is my proud privilege to welcome Professor Toril Moi, Duke Professor of Literature and Romance Studies and Professor of English, Philosophy and Theatre Studies at Luke University, formally to the college. I welcome dear Professor Toril Moi. Let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Toril Moi for her generosity in accepting our invitation and giving this memorial lecture. On behalf of Berkman's community, I welcome you to this program. Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiyat, our manager and Vicar General, Archdiocese of Changanacherry, he is with us in all our endeavors and motivates us to do the task with all utmost sincerity and commitment. Dear Father, I wholeheartedly welcome you to this program. I cordially welcome our Vice Principals, Dr. Benny Matthew, Reverend Father Reggie P. Gurian, and Reverend Father Dr. Jose George. Our former professors, heads of the departments, teachers from the neighboring colleges, and those who are virtually connected to this function. I would also take this opportunity to express my gratitude towards all those sincerely contributed to this event. My special thanks to the coordinator of this event, Professor P.J. Thomas, the head of the department. Last but not the least, I wholeheartedly welcome my dear students to this function. Welcoming you all once again, I remain. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. We welcome you to today's program. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Thomas Padiyat, the manager of St. Berkman's College, Changanacherry, to deliver the felicitation. Over to you, Father.
So, good evening, everybody. Very honorable Professor Toril Moi, respected Principal Jacob Matthew, Vice Principals, respected professors, and dear students. I am also personally very happy to be part of this 31st C.A. Sheppard Memorial Lecture. At the outset, may I express my gratitude for the organizers and also for inviting me personally to this program. Through this lecture, we could honor and respect a great luminary of St. Berkman's, Professor C.A. Sheppard, as already introduced by Professor Jacob Matthew, the principal. C.A. Sheppard was a great luminary of this institution. And I am also happy to hear Professor Toril Moi. Of course, she will speak on Wittgenstein and literary criticism. As a student of philosophy also, I am happy to hear her on Wittgenstein. Our principal has already extended a very hearty and warm welcome to Professor Toril Moi. Nevertheless, from the part of the management, may I welcome Professor Toril Moi once again to this memorial lecture. And we are also grateful to Professor Toril Moi for taking a great effort to be part of this and for accepting our invitation. Many erudite professors have been And professors and academicians have been part of this memorial lecture. And as we said, as I already recalled, we are lucky to have Professor Toril Moi this year. Due to the global pandemic, we are having this lecture this year online. Nevertheless, we are making use of the new possibilities that we have. Once again, I thank as well as wish a very success to this memorial lecture. Particularly, I thank and appreciate the great effort of Professor P.J. Thomas, the head of the Department of English, St. Bergman's College, Changanacherry, for organizing this lecture very well. So thank you very much. So we are happy to hear Professor Toril Moi. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Moving on to the head of the Department of English, Professor P.J. Thomas, to introduce the speaker of our day. Over to you, sir.
Sir, you're muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you, Nina, and all the distinguished participants, our principal, manager, and all the dignitaries who are participating in this lecture. In fact, it will be an injustice if I'm going to speak long, since you're all waiting eagerly to listen to Professor Toril Moi. However, I will make a very brief and very perfunctory introduction to Professor Toril Moi. In fact, I feel like a dwarf today, standing on the shoulders of two great giants. One is Professor Sheppard. In fact, I'm right now a member of the Department of English, and therefore I share that legacy, and I pay my tribute to the memory of Professor Sheppard. And the other great giant with us today is the well-known feminist critic, intellectual and literary critic, Professor Toril Moi. In fact, I lured her to give this talk, assuring her that I will retire in a few years' time. And so I'm extremely happy and grateful that Professor Toril Moi has accepted this invitation, and she's here with us today. And as you all know, currently, Professor Toril Moi is James B. Duke Distinguished Professor of Literature and Director of the Center for Philosophy, Art, and Literature, and Professor of English and Romance Studies and Philosophy at Duke University, Durham, North Carolina. She's also at present an adjunct research professor at Norway's National Library. Born in Norway, she was educated at the University of Bergen and later moved to Oxford as a lecturer in French. She has been with the Duke University since 1989. As many of you know, her major works include Sexual Textual Politics, Feminist Literary Theory in 1985, Simone de Beauvoir, The Making of an Intellectual Woman in 1994, Henry Gibson and the Birth of Modernism in 2007. The book won the Best Book Award of the Modern Language Association. Then Sex, Gender and the Body, the student edition of What's a Woman in 2005. Revolution of the Ordinary, Literary Studies after Wittgenstein, Austin and Cavell in 2017. And she also edited the Kristeva Reader in 1986 and also edited another book, French Feminist Thought in 1987. And as students and teachers, something to be noted about her is that she has won Duke's University Teacher of the Year Award and Dean's Award for Excellence in Mentoring of Graduate Students. And I see in her a very clear trajectory of phenomenology, existentialism, to ordinary language, philosophy, and even theology. And I know that this introduction is very insufficient, but however, it was an honor to speak so many words in honor of Professor Toril Moi. And I also thank her for being my teacher, though for a short period at Cornell. And today, Professor Toril Moi will talk on Wittgenstein and literary criticism, a new direction in literary studies. So in the name of all of you, I welcome Professor Toril Moi to deliver the 31st Sheppard Memorial Lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Can you all hear me? Please let me know if there are technological issues. And I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. We'll see if my PowerPoint works. Okay, let's see. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So first of all, I must begin by praising my host. I am so sorry I cannot be with you in India. I would have loved to visit. I also have read up online, and I have discovered that St. Berkman's College is one of the best colleges in India. I am grateful and honored that your leaders are also welcoming me. I am fantastically happy to be able to give a talk in memory of someone, Professor Sheppard, who is honored for his teaching and his scholarship. This is so important. Now, today, more than ever, we need teaching, and we need teaching in the humanities. And I was glad to hear that Professor Sheppard was interested in Shakespeare, because as it happens, part of my lecture is built on Stanley Cavell's philosophical reading of Shakespeare's King Lear. So there is a kind of connection here. But so first of all, I thank you deeply for inviting me, and maybe sometime in the future I could turn up in person to see your beautiful campus and college, but not this time. As long as this global pandemic goes on, we are stuck with Zoom. I sat up late last night and made my PowerPoint because my lecture is quite long, and nothing is harder than following a lecture on Zoom. I mean, in person, we have more tolerance for long lectures.
Thank you, ma'am. It's now time to move on to our question and answer session. Me and Diane will be simultaneously reading out the questions from both Zoom and YouTube platform.
Well, Nina, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Ma'am, this question is from Professor Wimmel John of our department. It's divided in several parts, so if you need me to read it again at any point, please say so. He has asked, some of Wittgenstein's fundamental propositions seem to suggest an existential crisis and a failure in the act of communication. Acknowledgement can also be an act of recognizing difference. Is it an acknowledgement of this chasm between subjectives, genders, experiences that is the spirits behind the ideas such as gynocriticism and the écriture feminine? Isn't that a little depressing? Are we doomed to be in loops of non-communication? Also, what import does this have for some of our contemporary crises in politics, such as the post-truth phenomenon?
Right. I wish I could solve the post-truth phenomenon. But okay, I want to say that the question goes to the heart of an important issue. I think that my view is this: Cavell and Wittgenstein certainly emphasize the difficulties of acknowledgement, but they think it's possible. there's a whole sort of crucial topic I never talked about, and that's skepticism. Skepticism takes the line, and skepticism is totally at the basis of the post-truth phenomenon. I think at some point back in the 1970s and certainly 80s, all literary critics were becoming skeptics. The idea was that words do not connect to reality. Signifiers slip around, and in terms of relations to, and the text could mean everything, anything and everything. I remember back in the 80s, we had the case where I lived in England in the 80s, and there was this ongoing example of how could we could argue that the Shakespeare's Macbeth was about Manchester United, because the signifier is open and slippery. And then, of course, you lose all conviction in having seen something real and so on. So I would say the crisis and failure is what leads to tragedy in King Lear. But tragedy is only one part of it. Acknowledgement is possible, and then that can lead to what you can call comedy. Cavell has this wonderful book called Pursuits of Happiness about the Hollywood remarriage comedy, where the couple manages to, in spite of everything, to see, to find a way to understand one another. So underlying the question is a need for, and I agree with the questioner, we need to discuss the sort of postmodern skepticism here. And that would, of course, be another lecture and another seminar, but this is so that I turned to Wittgenstein and Cavell precisely because I needed to get out of the skepticism and the depressing feeling that you can never understand another human being, to say, well, we can acknowledge the other. In some cases, I should say acknowledgement doesn't mean agreement. To see how it is with you isn't necessarily to applaud and agree with what you see, but it does say that human communication is possible, that we can train ourselves to do it, and that this is the antidote to skepticism. I think that's the best I can do with that.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Ida Dolmer. Her question is, Rita Felsky argues in the introduction to The Limits of Critique that post-critical reading can exist alongside critical reading. Would you say that a Wittgenstein literary criticism can be said to be a post-critical? And do you think it can coexist with more traditional literary?
Sorry, could you repeat the last sentence?
Do you think it can coexist with more literary critique, or are they two mutually exclusive?
Oh, I think, as you can hear, what I think is original about this paper is that it draws attention to the attitude and existential and intellectual investments of the critic and the form they take in the investigation of the text. And therefore, as I think I said at the end, there are tons of other theories and so on that could be inspiring to a critic inspired by Wittgenstein. For example, when I read Wittgenstein, I have been doing Wittgenstein and so on for a long time, but I never stopped being a feminist. I still read Simone de Beauvoir. Wittgenstein and Cavell won't tell you what to think about women's oppression. So if you want to find that out, you need to read those texts. And so for the post-critical move, you know, I think Rita, whose work I admire enormously, and I'm lucky that we are good friends, but Rita is always stressing that to call her work the post-critical movement is in a way wrong, because the idea is not to stop being critical like now, where you're just giving up on critical judgment. Not at all. You want to get it right, and you want to criticize what needs to be criticized, but you are moving away from the idea that critique is the only possible justification for doing literary criticism. So to that extent, I see myself as very compatible with Rita's work, and we both share the idea that the humanities become more exciting and interesting if we emphasize not just that we can do critique, which of course we can, but we can do all these things that help enlarge our consciousness and our insights and read better and see something important in art and literature.
Thank you, ma'am. Before I move on to the next question, I'd just like to inform all those in the Zoom panel that they will be free to unmute their mics and ask questions if they have some. All right, the next question is from Mantri Venkata Raghuram. It's divided into two parts, ma'am. Part one. Ma'am, it appears that you have made some priori assumptions about theory and ordinary. How exactly did you handle the isomorphism between thought and reality in your work on Wittgenstein? Part two, did you try to bring back words back from their metaphysical to their everyday use in Revolution of the Ordinary? Or did you make use of Kant's undressing of Wittgenstein in her work?
Okay, so I do try first of all, my reading of Wittgenstein is the reading developed in the tradition of ordinary language philosophy. I'm very aware that there are, of course, many other ways to read Wittgenstein, some of which even try to turn him into a theorist, which I resist. So obviously, I'm not speaking for all Wittgensteinians here, but I'm trying to do the ordinary language mode of reading him. The idea of bringing words back from the metaphysical to the ordinary, to the everyday context where they are normally at home is very important. But note that you can't do it in the abstract. You can only do it once you have a case of language use. And so in Revolution of the Ordinary, I have a whole chapter on writing and style in contemporary criticism, this tendency we have to produce writing that's utterly unreadable. Like you can't understand what the critic is saying. You feel that they are so committed to the idea that using super difficult and abstract terms is going to have intrinsically a critical function by making you come out of the ordinary. There is in contemporary criticism a huge disagreement about whether the ordinary is the place where ideology works, where the common sense rules, and it will mire you in status quo thinking. I have a whole chapter on that in my book. And I, of course, think that it's quite the opposite. I think that it's when we lose touch with the ordinary that we start producing, as it were, words that mean nothing, that build a kind of simulacrum of meaning but aren't meaningful. That's the work of criticism that Wittgenstein thinks we need to do, to cure our words of their tendency to run amok and start meaning nothing. As for the so I do write a lot about words and the ordinary and metaphysics in my book. As for thought and reality, my sense is I agree that the limits of my world the limits of my language are the limits of my world, in that if we can't find what we are capable of saying, but remember, we are capable of saying a lot more than we think, I think sometimes. And some people just are more, should we say, attuned to the opportunities of language. My example is always Shakespeare. Shakespeare managed to convey things you might not have thought possible. So let's not settle into the idea that the limits of the language is easy to see. The whole point for Wittgenstein is if our language has limits, but we're in the middle of it and they are the limits of our world, then we cannot think ourselves beyond the limits. This is the end of the Tractatus, as if we were standing on the other side and knew where they were. That would be incoherent. But I'll stop there. I think I don't deal much with Kant in my book, but I am, of course, deeply committed to teaching the third critique. And a lot of what I talked about today about aesthetics and judgment and so on does go straight to Kant, as does the idea, many of Cavel's ideas, but they are filtered through Wittgenstein. I hope that's some beginning. It certainly isn't everything one can say about it.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Nisarga Batterjee. What we really consider an action of acknowledgement may still be a narcissistic act. The other we are acknowledging might only be a construction of what we think is the other. What's your opinion about this?
So let me see if I understood the question. We'll actually read the question once more so I can think about the distinction there. Would you read it again?
Sure, ma'am. Won't what we really consider an action of acknowledgement may still be a narcissistic act. The other we are acknowledging might only be a construction of what we think is the other.
Ah, yes. So this is the skepticism again. The question is, you're trying to acknowledge the other. But how do you know you're doing it? Couldn't it just be a complete construction you're projecting onto the other? Well, you see, that is a risk you take. But if you're wedded to skepticism, you know, okay, sometimes you try hard to acknowledge the other and you will realize that you got it wrong. It's like when you read a text and you realize 3 years later, you look back at it and you say, God, I don't agree with this anymore. There is no guarantee that you will get it right, but you cannot draw from that a general sort of metaphysical conclusion, which is, if I get it wrong sometimes, it follows that I will always get it wrong. Let me give a very basic example. Let's say I'm teaching my Wittgenstein seminar. Suddenly, a student grabs her stomach, starts to, writhe in pain and is screaming how much it hurts. Now, what I do then, you see, acknowledgement isn't always words. So what I would do then is immediately call the campus ambulance and get her to hospital. Now, that's an acknowledgement of her pain. That's an acknowledgement that, of course, could be wrong. Maybe this student is a very well-trained actress and they're just trying it on. But that's not how we live our everyday lives. I want to put to you all that in most cases, our everyday acts of acknowledgements are pretty accurate because we know how to read an expression. We know how to read a gesture. We can tell, even if someone doesn't say anything, that they're pretty unhappy with what I just said, things like that. But of course, take the student writhing in pain in my seminar. Let's say that she is an actress, and once I call the ambulance and the paramedics are running into the room, she gets up and says, "Ha-ha, got you." Well, the next time she does that, I will be a bit more suspicious and maybe I'll go over and touch the bad spot. But, but nevertheless, the fact that there is a chance of getting it wrong doesn't mean that everything is a construction. You always get it and you will always do this. The underlying thing here is, what do we need to counter skepticism? Skepticism is right in saying that, there's a great chance that you will not be able to read another's mind all the time. But it's wrong in making that the general ontological premise of human coexistence, to put it that way.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is from Sanmitha. Is it necessary to validate our understanding of experience with a theoretical praxis?
Is it necessary to... Okay, read that one again too.
Is it necessary to validate our understanding of experience with a theoretical praxis?
Right. Now, this is a confusing question for me because you have your understanding of experience. Then you have the question of validating that understanding. So again, can I rely on it? Can I trust it? Think of words like trust, which I used quite a bit about trusting experience, as another way of pointing to the limits of skepticism. So, and then by a theoretical praxis, if that means, do I need to be a theorist to have any chance of knowing whether I should trust my experience? The answer is no, of course not. There are all kinds of ways of trying to trust your experience, and literature is often about this. I'm thinking of... well, suddenly I was thinking of The Wings of the Dove, but that goes into completely different things. So I would just say, of course, theory isn't what you go on when you want to know if you're right about someone or something. But on the other hand, readings of philosophy and theory can often give you insights that can be helpful. But you know, we all know really wise people who seem to have extreme depths of experience and good judgment, and they're not all theorists, so of course not.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Samit Chakraborty. Professor, is the idea of obviousness related to one's own distinct lived experience and the cultural space that comes from it?
Okay, so I missed just the last half of the sentence. Is the ideal of obviousness linked to one's own personal experience and what?
And the cultural space that one comes from.
Oh yeah, the cultural, yeah. I would have thought it is. One of the ideas of this theory, one of the important ideas of the whole understanding of acknowledgement, which I do write more about in Revolution of the Ordinary, is that the acknowledgement is always specific to the individual who carries it out. The kind of acknowledgement that you need to give someone will vary with your relationship to that someone. A very easy example, this isn't about culture yet, but we'll get there. A very easy example would be the idea that say my dear mother died some years back, but say that my mother is very sick and possibly dying, and I'm her daughter. The kind of acknowledgement I need to give my mother, acknowledgement of her pain and so on, isn't the same kind of acknowledgement that, say, a nurse needs to give her. That is, let's say, and now we're in total hypothesis here, let's say that I'm a daughter, but I'm also a fully trained nurse. And I treat my mother efficiently and kindly like the best nurse. That might still not be the right kind of acknowledgement required from a daughter to a mother. You can see there the position of nurse, position of daughter requires a different kind of relationship. Now, in the same way, in living in a specific culture, and I do want to emphasize a different moment in history, it's quite obvious that reading Shakespeare in the United States in 2020 is so different from reading him in, I don't know what, in the British 18th century when they detested Shakespeare. And the kind of things we want from a text, the kind of things we think are meaningful and so on, are deeply socially, historically, culturally based. And I think when Cavell talks about acknowledgement and the need for self-revelation, there's an encouragement there to try to work on getting clearer on what we take for granted, getting clearer on how we stand in relation to the text or to the other. And then that will never be perfect. We'll never get outside ourselves to the point that a long essay on Wittgenstein and his friends ages back. So I know, and he helped write the play that was filmed by Derek Jarman. So I know that he is interested in Wittgenstein. But on the other hand, he has also written some text where he casts Wittgenstein as necessarily aligned with conservatism because of his understanding of language. And so I totally disagree with him on that one. And I write about that in my chapters. It's 7 or 8 in the book, 7, I think, in Revolution of the Ordinary. But so the point is, I think I'm too ignorant to answer the question, in that I'm not quite sure what Eagleton fully meant. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Dr. Manas Rajan Mishra from Odisha. Can we relate to Wittgenstein's representational approach of language to the existential modes and convictions of King Lear?
Will you read that again too? Because so when it comes on Zoom, somehow it's harder to take in questions. So read it again.
Sure, ma'am. Can we relate to Wittgenstein's representational approach of language to the existential modes and convictions of King Lear?
So yes, Wittgenstein's understanding of language and King Lear. Well, I would say, in one way, I would say the text to read is, of course, Cavell's The Avoidance of Love, but he doesn't spell this, because he's showing that questions of avoidance and acknowledgement arise in the play and in literary criticism, but he doesn't really go fully back to language. I will say, here's something I can say. I think the answer to the question is yes, we can, but I want to say this. This may be helpful for the ones of you who have read a lot of Derrida or other post-structuralist theories of language. This easiest way I can put this is that Wittgenstein is interested. So both Derrida and Wittgenstein believe that speech acts go wrong. Derrida says, oh, the letter may always not arrive. And Wittgenstein is totally committed to the investigations of misunderstandings, mishaps, accidents of various kinds. This is also very strong in Austen's work. So, but what's the difference then? Everyone agrees that sometimes meaning is not conveyed, or we misspeak, or we mishear, or we fail entirely to understand one another. What Derrida does is to build a theory that can account for the mishaps before they happen, as it were. That's what the theory does. It lays down the parameters for a phenomenon, say here language, in such a way that it builds in the possibility of mishaps from the beginning. In that way, you can say that Derrida's idea of the mishaps of language is one where he stands and looks towards the future where they will arise, and his theory will account for that. With Wittgenstein, Austen, and Cavell, ordinary language philosophy in general is totally the opposite. Here we say, well, you can't, language is infinite. There are going to be infinite numbers of speech acts, and some of them will go wrong, but some will not. And so all we can do... So all we can do is to investigate the mishaps once they've happened. It's more like you stand and you look back towards what someone says and you say, can we get clear on this? That's the therapeutic aspect of Wittgenstein. We try to see what went wrong. We try to see why we're lost here and how we can find our way out. And so the answer to the question then becomes, of course, I think that's precisely the kind of attitude towards language that you need to read King Lear. What is up with that speech act about abdication and dividing the kingdom and all that? So I know it's not exactly about representation, because Wittgenstein's understanding of language is not that language is representation. Language is use, essentially. But that's another question.
Well, ma'am, thank you so much. There are lots of wonderful questions. People have been participating really well, but unfortunately, it's past 8:30, and we would like to wind up. Is it okay with you, ma'am?
Oh, yes, of course. I want to say I am so happy to have been allowed to speak to you all. The questions were wonderful and extremely illuminating. And of course, this is where Zoom lectures are so frustrating. What I would have liked to do now is to hang out with you all, meet with you, sit and have a meal and talk about Wittgenstein or whatever else we want to talk about. And instead, we're just at home. So thank you very much for having me. And thank you for maybe, I hope one day we can all meet in person again.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We ensure all the participants that all the questions that you have provided us, it will be directed to the speaker. And there's I would like to apologize for a slight miscommunication on my part. Since this is a memorial lecture, there will be no certificates or feedback forms. That was a slight miscommunication on my part. Please forgive me. Okay, now let's move on to the vote of thanks, which will be delivered by Dr. Raju Sebastian, the Associate Professor of the Department of English. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible, Dan?
Yes, sir, you are.
Thank you. Thank you. My bandwidth is a bit low. Therefore, please excuse me for the breaks up in between. A very good evening to everyone, all the distinguished participants and the esteemed dignitaries who were part of this memorial lecture. I am very happy to thank Professor Toril Moi from the depth of my heart on behalf of all gathered, all who are part of this memorial lecture, for bringing criticism back to life, because you have instilled in us a lot of confidence, and you have relieved us from a lot of complex, that because we do not know Derrida, because we do not know Foucault, we are unable to read literature. So thank you, ma'am, for giving a very new outlook on how to read a text, how to read literature. It should be, as far as I understand, you have said that we must pick up a text having a burning problem that have with us in our own context. The text that we pick up must make sense to us in the context that we live in. That means reading is actually life-giving to us. And thank you very much, ma'am, for initiating us into making reading a lively act that makes a lot of sense to us. On behalf of all gathered here, and on behalf of the institution, St. Berkman's College, I thank you, Professor Toril Moi, for delivering the Sheppard Memorial Lecture 2020. And I must now thank our manager, Reverend Dr. Thomas Padiath, for his gracious presence and for his felicitation. Thank you very much, Dr. Padiyeth, for your support and encouragement and your kind words. Dr. our principal is a friend of our department. That means he is with us in everything that we do. Thank you, sir, for your gracious presence and your nice words of welcome. And everyone who is gathered here or who is part of this gathering knows that it is Professor P.J. Thomas who made this a reality. And Professor Thomas has brought in a lot of international luminaries onto the campus, and Professor Toril Moi is the latest. And I am sure, true to the legacy of Professor Sheppard, Professor P.J. Thomas has taken the glory of SB to the international arena, and it is his personal relationship and commitment with all these great scholars that makes it possible for him to bring them to the campus and to speak to us. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your committedness and your hard work and your commitment to the institution. I must now thank the people who have made this lecture a reality. People who have worked behind the curtain. Professor Raju Sebastian, the host of this Zoom gathering. Professor Nithin Varghese, Professor Anish Joseph, the anchors Dan George and Nina Abraham, and Raju Sebastian, who is watching the meeting on YouTube. All of you I thank all of you profoundly on behalf of the department and on behalf of all gathered here. And last but not least, the participants of this lecture. It is you who have made this a grand success. Thank you very much for your wonderful questions. Thank you very much for your great attention. And thank you once again, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Sir, we have now come to the end of our 31st Sheppard Memorial Lecture. It was indeed a great pleasure to have you all with us today. So thank you for joining us and have a wonderful time ahead.
Bye.
Professor Moi, thank you so much. I'm here, Thomas.
I see you.
I have no words to thank you, but anyway, so you made us all arrogant and in fact vulnerable with a very convincing talk.
Well, thank you. And we can always email. So take care. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Yeah. I am almost at lunchtime here.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, yes. As you said, you really worked hard. You must be really tired. We would like to offer you lunch or something to eat, but unfortunately we can't. Thank you so much for your hard work. Great.
Well, bye, everyone.
Bye.